Hello and welcome back to Indie Book Talk. Today we have Kacey Rayburn, who's the author of Sing Our Bones Eternal, which is one of the more beautiful titles we've had on the show. Kacey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So I asked you pre-podcast, and you told me this was a gothic fantasy. Um, what got you into that genre? And I asked because I know kind of some history, and I'm dying to hear about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, it came from a couple of places. One is just reading other people's work, reading books, and finding what I gravitate towards. And I was finding a pattern and a theme, really gravitating towards Gothic historical fiction, and then loving that fantasy element whenever that's weaved into the Gothic fiction. So it was a way to take two of my favorite things, fantasy and Gothic fiction, and kind of meld them together. So that definitely is one of the inspirations and how I gravitated towards Gothic fantasy. I think the other big one is just the way that I grew up and the environment that I grew up in as a kid. My dad and granddad were the caretakers of our local cemetery, and we lived in a really small town in Appalachia. And so,
Oh,
a lot of people knew each other, and there were only like two, cemeteries in the area.
mm,
And just seeing how people would, handle grief and death and loss, and be able to come together as a community and address some of those darker, tougher existential themes from a young age, I think really inspired me. And I, always gravitated towards the Gothic fiction and Edgar Allan Poe's poetry. I was like obsessed with it in junior high school when I first learned about it. So just kind of the dark and dreary vibes have always been my jam, and I've always gravitated towards that. And then when I was reading and got older, where I could enjoy more adult books and older books, I really liked the Gothic fiction and the Gothic fantasy in particular.
And I understand that you are a psychologist.
Yes. Yeah.
So, are you writing with any sense of like informing people about mental health or using psychology in your work as an author?
That's a great question. So I would say yes, but not in a textbook, direct, academic kind of way. So I'm not writing, nonfiction. I'm not writing, textbooks or books that you'd find in, college courses or things like that. But I would hope, and one of my goals is to bring some awareness of mental health issues that people might be experiencing. I'm particularly interested in people's experiences of trauma and how they find healing and recover from trauma. And I would say that definitely is a theme in my debut, Sing Our Bones Eternal. It's underneath it. If you look for it, there are definitely some messages and some commentary on how unhealthy family dynamics and community beliefs can affect people and how they carry that forward in their own life, and whether they can, they have a choice to follow that same path and kind of repeat that pattern, or they can break the pattern and try to become, who they were meant to be, who they want to be, even if that means that they might have to make different choices or kind of separate themselves from some of the communities or the family that's, contributing to some of the, the trauma. So that is definitely something that comes through in the poems and the books. Anything that I'm writing, it usually has some kind of an undertow or a theme
mhm.
about mental health and healing and transformation. But I wouldn't say that it's, like an obvious or a direct way. I think it's there and people could pick up on it if they looked for it or if they wanted to.
But it's not so overt that it takes away from the story.
Yes, it's still,
Right,
yeah, and
it's
it's
still
still a
interesting.
fantasy. It's not the nonfiction. It's definitely the fantasy. But people are finding healing and transformation in the fantasy world, and I think that's something that's really beautiful and near and dear to my heart, because I find fantasy is not only an escape but a way to kind of see um, how people do things and how they problem solve, or how they find creative ways to kind of slay the monsters and, be able to kind of slay the wicked witch and, be able to become their own, hero and heroine. So I think that the fantasy world is a really nice place to be able to experiment in an environment for me that feels healing. And it's a different way than what I do every day when I'm listening to people's stories. And it's a privilege to do that, but it's really heavy. And, I don't really want to write, not at this point, maybe I will in the future, but right now I don't really want to write a lot of instructional textbook type stuff. I don't really want to write heavy memoirs and things like that, just because that's so much like what I do in my day-to-day job, that being able to go to that fantasy world, but still be able to process emotions and find, healing and catharsis for myself and for the characters in the books that I'm writing, that has seemed to be a really good outlet for me. And I've really, really enjoyed that, because I can bring that awareness to people who would like that and maybe are looking for that, but I can do it in a way that also feels like it's some self-care for me too, because I'm working in a genre that I like, and it's a little bit different than what I'm doing every day. It doesn't feel so heavy.
Hmm.
Have you heard of this concept? I've recently become aware of it. Bibliotherapy.
I have. Yeah, I have. It hasn't been that long since I've heard about it, but yeah, I have heard that. I think it would be wonderful. I wish there was, at least in the field that I'm in and the environment that I work in, I wish there was more openness to those types of therapies. There's a big push in a lot of mental health systems that I've worked in to do things that are very much, cognitive based. I mean, and I understand that there's value in that, and there absolutely is. And, doing behavioral interventions is also really important. But sometimes it's lacking in the kind of the creative domain, and being able to do bibliotherapy and art therapy, expressive therapy, that those types of things have benefit too. And I think some people really respond to those things. So that's something I'd like to see in the field, change, for people to become more open to the value of those types of things. Mm-hmm.
So, for those of
So
us in the
because
audience like me, what is it?
yeah,
What's that? What did you
What is
say?
bibliotherapy?
bibliotherapy is basically at least in the way that I've interacted with it is this idea of actually prescribing stories. So
Mm-hmm.
saying you're dealing with X, here's a book or a short story or even poetry that will um, may help you to deal with
Okay.
this situation in a safer way, which when I discovered it fascinated me, because that's why I wrote the books that I wrote.
Hmm.
I write about grief, I write about death, I write
Yes.
about, all of these things. And so for me, writing them was cathartic and was healing, but I also saw other people reading them saying the same thing, saying this helped me grieve or this helped me feel better about the situation. So I love this
Hmm.
idea of prescribing, like, we all love to do that. Like, here, read this book
Right.
because I think you'll like it. But it's like, here, read this book. I think it will help you feel better
And these
is a
people are
mind blowing.
experiencing something similar to you. Perhaps
Yes.
you'll
Yeah.
find some value in it. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I was just wondering because I've just recently come across this.
Well,
Um,
I saw when I before the before our chat tonight, I was kind of taking a look at both of you and learning a little bit more about you too. And I saw that you looked like your newest book, or maybe one of your newer books, On the Bank of Oblivion, was about a child or a teenager who had some medical or some physical things, issues going on, and finds a goddess or some type of a fantasy creature,
yeah.
and then they're going to maybe strike a bargain. I don't know. But it sounded really interesting, and it kind of ties into what we were talking about with the bibliotherapy, of how, we can we can take real life experiences and real pain that people have gone through, and kind of put it in a magical realism or in a fantasy setting, and people can still take that metaphor and that experience and find some kind of help or healing, even in a fiction world. And that's really cool. I think that's one of the coolest things about writing and art and creative processes like that, is that we can still take something away from it that's really tangible and really helpful.
Absolutely. And I did not pay her to say that, by the way.
No, no, you didn't.
Not a paid promo.
It just happened to link up with what you said, so I thought I'm going to mention that.
Well, thank you. So when did Sing Our Bones Eternal come out?
When does it come out? So it'll come out at the end of March, on the 29th of March, and it's actually on International Mermaid Day. And because it's a dark Little Mermaid reimagining, I thought International Mermaid Day would be perfect. So it's on
That's
the
awesome.
29th of March. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think I'll have to look at our calendar, but listeners, you'll know before I do whether this has come out before or after the launch. But either way, go buy it because it
It'll be
sounds
very
amazing.
close. Yeah, it'll be real close.
So what's your, or do you have a marketing plan for your book?
So that's a really good question. So as you know, as an indie author, I would say that, marketing plan is one of the things that I've had to really work at the hardest, because I don't have, a publisher that's working on my behalf that already has, an established following or credibility, where people just kind of see the book and, oh, it was published by this place. So, I want to look at it or check into it, or, it's not like there are thousands and thousands of people out there hearing about it or finding out about it. So I would say that, I'm realizing how important marketing really is, especially for indie authors. And I would say I have a lot of room to learn and continue to grow in that front. My biggest source of marketing right now has been doing some book tours, building relationships with like bookstagrammers, with some small publishers, with some other authors that are willing to, read and review and spread the word. And I've got a street team going, which this is the first time that I've ever done a street team, and it's been a really cool experience, and I've already learned a lot from it. So in terms of having like a really pretty and neat, organized marketing plan that I could say, here it is, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not quite there yet, but I've used those types of, I guess, kind of like community. I've leaned on the community to really try to help and spread the word, and I've really tried in advance to like make those relationships with people, so that way when my book got ready to launch, people would know a little bit about me, and maybe have an interest in wanting to help spread the word. But I definitely, am learning, and I'm open to learning on how to improve upon that, because that is really important for indie authors. And that only becomes more clear to me, as time passes and as the book launch gets closer.
Yeah, we are our only marketing team for the most part, unless you hire us.
Right? I mean, we do everything pretty much.
So you mentioned a street team, and I don't know if we've ever delved into that on the podcast before. Can you tell a little bit more about your street team?
Sure. So I decided I wanted to create a street team, mainly because I was really wanting to build some excitement and some buzz, and to get the word out about, Sing Our Bones Eternal. And so I knew I wanted to build a street team. And so, you know, I feel like there's so many things that I could say, but just to try to keep it more general, what I did was I thought a little bit about what I wanted the main goals of the street team to be. Like having those built relationships with people, having people who might, or having a combination of people who might be really interested in the book and the genre, as well as maybe a handful of people who the book isn't necessarily in the genre that they would typically read, but just kind of having that more kind of broader, diverse feedback of how people are interpreting it or experiencing it. So trying to have, kind of a variety of people on the street team that could maybe offer some different opinions and bring in some different viewpoints. I created a little swag pack, which again, I'd love to have a bigger one to give to everybody, but with an indie author budget, that's not possible for me. So I just created, a small little giveaway that I might be able to share with people who are interested in being a part of the street team. And then, I thought of the tasks that I might want them to do, reading an arc, sharing a mood board, to their Instagram or to their blog, just to kind of get people interested in what the aesthetic of the book is, see if it's something that they might be interested in. So yeah, I mean, there's so much that went into it. But I'm so glad I did it, because I really think that has been the most helpful part of marketing for me, because someone will look at it and see, oh, and then, maybe they'll follow you, or they'll want to read the book, and then maybe someone on theirs kind of sees it, and then they share it to their stories. And, so it's a really great way too, to make other connections even beyond just the folks who are on the street team. So I'm really glad that I did that. I was a little bit nervous about it at first because I hadn't done it before, but I don't regret that at all. I think that was one of the best decisions that I made for the launch.
Great.
And quick definition here, in case you've listened to this and you're still going, yeah, okay, but what is this? A street team is basically just a group of people who are willing to get super excited about your book and tell others about it. You can use one before the book launches, or like right at the book launch, and it's like your hype squad. So you're giving them, often you are giving them something in exchange. Sometimes often it's an early copy of the book, so that they can read it and get excited about it, but also sometimes things like bookmarks or deleted scenes, or I had coloring sheets for one of mine once, because my readers are teenagers, but teenagers like to color, and some of them are adults who have kids, so but really they can do almost anything, and it's a matter of finding, as you said, Kacey, the right people who are going to get excited and are going to share that excitement with their
Yes. Yeah, and I've
followers or
been so
friends.
fortunate. Yeah, I've been so fortunate, because even for some of the people on the street team who maybe the book isn't their typical read, or is not their cup of tea, they've been very honest about that. Hey, this wasn't necessarily the kind of read I'd usually read, but maybe here are some of the strengths or the highlights, and here's what didn't click for me, or what didn't connect for me. So I mean, I've had some people just really gush over it, and it was just really a good fit for them. And then I've had some other people read it, and it just wasn't their cup of tea, but they were very constructive, and still like, hey, here are the people who might like it. Do you like dark fairy tales? Do you like, gothic fiction? Do you like those types of books? So they've definitely been, even if, like I said, it hasn't been their, like, their jam, they've still been really constructive, but, honest about it. And then just the excitement and the support, has been so amazing. And I really am fortunate with my street team. I mean, they've been incredible. So shout out to them, and big thanks to them, because it's really helped me out a lot.
And knowing who isn't your ideal audience is actually really valuable too.
Yep.
And sometimes authors don't, you want everyone to like your book, right?
Of course.
But the truth is that there are some people who are going to love it, some people who are going to go, oh, okay, yeah, I read that, and some people who are probably going to hate it for whatever reason. Nothing to do with your writing or your story, but just it's not their thing. So knowing that, so you can target later marketing, is super useful.
I think so too. Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're watching this, you're watching Shelly's hands over her camera, because at the moment I don't know what she's broken, but she's broken something.
Having issues. So many issues.
So many issues.
It's all good.
We're fine. We're really good at derailing. It's our favorite game. Do you have any questions, Shelly, now that you're back with us?
Well, actually, I just want to go back a little bit to the book. So, is your book based in the Appalachia?
Oh, so that's a really great question. So, no, it's not. But I feel that it has a tie or a connection to that. Part of the book, for me, how the idea of it started, and the characters that kind of started coming to my mind, was really when I started. My aunt had passed away, and she and I were very close. And, I was realizing that my grandparents were getting older. And at the time, I only had two grandparents who were still living. And I had heard their stories as a child, and as a teen. And I was the kind of kid and teen who did listen. It wasn't like I just tuned them out. I mean, I enjoyed their stories, but not in the same way that I do now as an adult. And so I realized that, my time.
Our time's up. That's it. The end of the interview.
Sorry. I thought I had turned that off. I apologize.
No, that's fine.
Normally it's pets that derail us. So today it was my life.
Hey, I just jumped on board and derailed without even meaning to, right? So
she's one of us. She is one of us.
That's funny. Yeah. So let's see. What was I saying?
Grandparents' stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with my grandparents, I realized that, the time to ask questions and to kind of commit those stories to memory, was rapidly, decreasing. And so I sat down and had some conversations with them after my aunt passed away and really got more interested in family ancestry and really wanted to know more about, my roots and where my ancestors, came from. And so there were a lot of Irish and Scottish roots in my family. And when I decided to write Sing Our Bones Eternal, I set it in Scotland, and I created like a fantasy Scottish Isle, but also incorporated, real elements of the culture and the folklore and the mythology of Scotland and Ireland. And that really is how the book started for me. And because a lot of my ancestors did come from Ireland and Scotland, there are some of those similar, beliefs and family values, and even some of the folklore that kind of traveled or followed. So within the Appalachian area, there are a lot of, communities that have Scottish and Irish roots. So even though the book doesn't take place in Appalachia, I feel like there is a connection to it. It takes place to, the ancestral roots of my family in Scotland. So hope that answers your question. If not, I'm happy to try again, or
No,
you could
no,
ask it
that's
a different
perfect.
way. But yeah,
Did you
that's
incorporate any of your family's stories in any way? Did they get morphed into your book?
That's another really great question. Yes, I would say so. In the book, there are different types of creatures. So there are mermaids, and then there are kelpies, which is another Scottish. It seems like you guys are both nodding like you know what that is, a kelpie.
We
And
got our
then there are
mythology down on this podcast.
I thought you did, so no explanation needed. And then I don't know if you've heard of the blue men of the Minch. I think it's Minch, the blue men of the Minch. But it's also some folklore mythology from Scotland, and I incorporated that as well. And so each set of creatures kind of represents some different belief systems that occurred within my family and within the community at large. And so the main character is really trying to discover, who she is, and she wants to hold on to her family, but she's realizing that some of the things her family's doing is wrong and that she doesn't agree with it. So she's trying to figure out, loyalty versus doing the right thing, belonging. Can I belong to my family, but also belong to this group of people? And so there's a lot of, I think, messages about, you know, um, oppression and isms of a lot of kinds that you could glean from the questions that she's asking and the messages that are in the book. And certainly, within my family, we had beliefs, about people. We had beliefs about, society, about how to operate in the world. And some of them are really beautiful, and I'm proud of them, and I carry them with me. And some of them were not. And so trying to figure out how to, come to terms with that, and, be the person that I want to be, and figuring out what that means is sometimes it then isolates you from some of the people in your family or in your community, and how to fill that void or that hole. And within my family, there was a lot of addiction. That was something that was really huge in my family, a lot of alcoholism and drug addictions. And so for me, wanting to break those patterns and those cycles, I think also comes through in Sing Our Bones Eternal, is this idea of when you see family patterns that aren't good or aren't healthy, how do you react and respond to those? And I think that that's also something that comes through in the book that's more specific to my family too.
Great. Well,
It
thank you.
sounds like this is a book with many layers, and I'm
Yeah.
very excited about these layers of mythology and the gothic element and mermaids apparently, and
Yes.
all the family stuff. I feel like it's going to be a really complex but hopefully very readable story.
Mhm.
And so I did look at the calendar. This episode will be out immediately after your launch.
Okay.
So the book is available now, listeners. And if you want to get it, or if you want to know what Kacey's up to next, where can they find you on the internet?
So I have my author website, which is kaceyrayburn.com. And then I'm on Instagram and I'm pretty active there and it's at Fins and Fables. So you can find me there as well. And then the book is available through Amazon and also Barnes and Noble, and possibly a few indie bookstores as I'm working out the details of that right now, but definitely on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, you can find it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, same here. Thank you both. I'm glad to have been on the podcast with you, and I appreciate your time.